that very much links with the way I view astrology, that in the universe we have pure potentiality in the form of crystalline plasma. And that then steps down to a level of probability determined by your astrological archetypes in your own birth chart. And we then, as individuals, weave that tapestry of our lives, our reality, around that astrological probability for ourselves. It's the modeling clay that's not yet formed. So to me, it is a map of your individual consciousness. And the more we can start to see astrology as potential consciousness moving forwards and a language of love, then we're on a roll to reconnecting with our galactic family.
As we were in that meditation, I kind of got transported back to when we did our interview with Dr. Joe Dispenza. The last thing he told me before we started recording, when we set our intentions, he said, let's open some minds and hearts.
Yeah, beautiful.
So I wanted to just put that in as well. Are you ready to open some minds and hearts?
Yeah, 100%. And the image you had there, Emilio, with the turtles and deep seas, that to me instantly made me think of the dwarf planet Sedna. Because you may well be aware of Sedna. She has an 11,400-year orbit. So her orbit goes way out to the edge of what's called the Oort cloud. So she's bringing back new galactic information for us. And she's moving closer and closer to the Earth in her orbit. It's a highly elliptical orbit. And for other reasons, she's coming into prominence. And the whole myth around Sedna was, it's a long story, but essentially that she was supposedly rescued by her father from a marriage of betrayal. And they were in a canoe and a storm broke out. And in order to save himself, her father threw Sedna out of the canoe. She tried to climb back in, was hanging on with her fingers, and he chopped her fingers off and she floated down to the deep and became beautiful sea creatures of turtles and whales and dolphins. It was an entire metamorphosis, but it's so interesting that not only was that a very obvious betrayal by the patriarchy, you know, father chopping the fingers off, he doesn't come out so well from that myth, but equally it's an entire release from what we thought were old methods of safety and security that we trusted in the past, and just surrendering to the metamorphosis. And that's in a very strong position to Pluto right now, and that will continue for the next couple of years. Entire death, rebirth, transformation, metamorphosis of humanity. That's what we're moving into.
So much is going on right now. And even right before we get into the depths of it, I'd love to ask you, first of all, Pam Gregory, welcome on Just Tap In. What are you most excited about right now in your life?
Wow. When I'm getting very excited, I love to go down rabbit holes. So I never have any particular, business plan for 2024. I just kind of get very interested in things. And because Saturn is in Pisces now, this is very much the blend of science and spirituality, which is, Joe Dispenza's work as well. I have great admiration for him and I've attended about 14 of his advanced workshops in the past. But what I'm interested in, and it's so right for this year, is what I want to call the physics of creation. And that sounds incredibly grandiose because I don't have a science background. I'm not a physicist, but we are going to be going in leaps and bounds in our understanding of how the universe is constructed and what that means for us. I mean, a physicist I respect greatly is Nassim Haramein, who apparently has now worked out all the calculations for what he calls the physics of creation, the physics of how we create our reality. And it's that interests me a great deal, of how can we better understand how to construct our reality from understanding the science. And
Mm.
so that's where I'm headed. I'm talking later this month to Dr. Jude Currivan, who is an
Yes.
amazingly
Yes.
brilliant cosmologist, to dig into that a little more. And I've already had a pre-chat with her. So I think the universe is going to teach us so much, and particularly around April, which is an incredibly powerful month energetically and astrologically, we could be going in some really big jumps in understanding, because this year in particular, for various astrological reasons I can talk about if you'd like me to,
Mm.
we are going to be discovering much more about the out there, the further out there. And I can enlarge on that if you want me to.
Yeah, of course. And that has to do a lot with what I've heard you speak upon, the dwarf planets, the Kuiper planets that we're recently discovering. And, what has to do, what does that have to do with how it's influencing the collective consciousness of humanity on a deeper level? What have you found in your research in that?
Yes, I was just having a talk actually with Alan Clay on Monday. I don't even know what day it is today because the weeks move so quickly. But he runs the Dwarf Planet University in New Zealand, and the dwarf planets have been there for many, many thousands of years. These are orbiting bodies that are way beyond the orbit of Pluto. They've been there for thousands of years, as I say, but it's only because we have expanded our consciousness that we are now able to access them and integrate them as
And
a
see
higher
them.
level and see them, literally see them. So yes, of course, the telescopes have become much stronger, and we're very lucky in having an astronomer by the name of Mike Brown in America, who luckily is very well versed in mythology. And so he has named them very appropriately, which we discover later, that if you then put them in charts linked to that particular myth, people's charts, you can see how people are actually living them out in a very
Mm.
real way in their lives. And so this is very exciting work, because they do represent a higher octave of consciousness that is much more expanded and takes us into really living in the collective rather than this way we've lived in the past of what I like to call territorial materialism. This is mine and I've worked hard for it, and this is my fence at the edge of my garden and you can't, all of that is collapsing, being associated by our wealth and our status. The whole lot is going. That's Capricorn, and Pluto is doing a very good job of demolishing that as it's moved through since 2008. So we're moving into a much greater sense of egalitarianism, humanitarianism, but also there's so much to say about this, because yes, it's partly the dwarf planets that are expanding our understanding of the universe, but even the fact that Pluto is moving into Aquarius. If I look back in history and look at Pluto, has a 248-year orbit, so it has a very long orbit. And if I look back in history, those tended to be paradigm shattering times.
The Industrial Revolution in the 1500s.
Absolutely. Copernicus publishing his heliocentric theory in 1543. I mean, that was absolutely paradigm shattering for the average bloke in the street who woke up and saw the sun moving round the sky, and all of a sudden he's told that the earth moves around the sun, not the other way around. But with each step of this, because Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, and Uranus was the sky god in myth, so it's very associated with aviation, but also we get an understanding of the further out there than we have before. The ancient peoples could only see up to Saturn with the naked eye, and that's still true for us, and unless we're using a telescope, we can only see to Saturn. And when Uranus was discovered, this was the first planet beyond the naked eye, as it were. So that took us deeper into space. And particularly this year, not only is Uranus very strong because it rules Aquarius, but we have a very particular conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus in April, together with the total solar eclipse. It's going to be a heck of a month. And whenever we've had that, there has been another step in understanding the cosmos, the galaxy, but also a big step in in aviation, for instance, the first hot air balloon ride, the White brothers crossing the Atlantic for the first time. It's that kind of thing. Also, if you look at people who are very technologically able, like Steve Jobs, he has a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Tim Berners-Lee set up the World Wide Web. He has a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So this is going to give us a leap in technology, a leap in cosmic understanding, a big jump, I think, in space exploration, a big leap in understanding that we are going to be reunited to our galactic family, that we truly understand we are galactic beings. The calcium in our bones comes from the galaxy. The iron in our blood comes from the galaxy. We are galactic beings. We've just had this ridiculous idea of separation. But we are going to reconnect, and that's going to start as early as April. We're going to get a stronger and stronger sense. All this crazy thing about, little green men being scary things. I mean, this is our family we're going to reconnect with.
And now let's really blow people's minds right now with the galactic origin, because in December, I recently had the opportunity to travel to Egypt with a group of 40 people with Robert Edward Grant. And it was one of the most impactful weeks of my life, and I discovered how deep astrology really goes in our ancient history. So just to tell you this story, we got to spend a night inside the Great Pyramid and visit the King's Chamber. And along the week, a few days leading up to that, I had a couple conversations with Robert about this, and he's going to come back on the show to really go deep into it. But he started telling me that he would spend nights in the King's Chamber by himself. And as he started opening his third eye, he started seeing around the walls of the King's Chamber these figures. And then he started putting that together, and they became astrological constellations around the walls of the King's Chamber. And when I asked him, but did the Egyptians put that up there? He's like, no, the Egyptian government has actually tried to wash those off because it goes against the narrative that these Egyptians built the pyramids. And I asked him then, who was it? And he said one word. He literally said Arcturian. And I was like, okay. Let's really dive deep into that around the galactic origins, because if they had knowledge of astrology way before ancient Egypt, way before that, and if it was really these galactic beings who helped build the pyramids, then how did they have so much knowledge of astrology at that time?
Yeah, well, that's a Google God question, I think, rather than an Pam Gregory question, to be honest, because, this is into quite big stuff. But Robert, whose work I follow and I think is quite brilliant, has just put out another podcast in the last few hours talking about that trip and what happened, and how he is now translating the language inside the pyramids as Arcturian language. But you were there on that trip. And yes, he had an astrologer with him, and they perceived that the zodiac signs were all inscribed all around the walls of the pyramid, and they moved in a kind of linear time direction: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, etc. So that was going forwards in time, but then he perceived another layer above that, which is the precessional cycle, when the ages move backwards. We know we're moving out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, so that goes backwards. So, we know in the spiritual realm, time does not exist in a linear fashion, and Saturn in Pisces is actually dissolving our sense of linear time anyway. But time is way more complex than we think. It moves forwards, it moves backwards, it's in a vortex, it's cyclical. So that is absolutely astonishing. And the thing about the Arcturians, for sure, whoever built the pyramids came from out there, because it was only through, I think, the brilliant work of Robert Bouval, I think, was the first person to discover that. It was only when he was flying above the pyramids that he could see the pattern of the pyramids, two large ones and the smaller one offset. That was a perfect mirror of the belt of Orion.
Orion, yeah.
That was a belt of, mirror reflection of the belt of Orion. So they must have come from out there in order to get that pattern on Earth. So why did they build them using the language of astrology? And the reason I think they did was because that's a universal language. It's not only a galactic language, and by the way, I think astrology is going to go through huge leaps and bounds in the coming years to reconnect to our galactic families, but it was a language of universality. It wasn't French, Spanish, Chinese. It was astrological and astronomical. And this is really the age that we're moving into right now.
Huh. And what do you think that humanity must understand first about astrology in order for us to evolve our perception of it and then start connecting with the universal language, the universal beings that are out there as well, waiting to connect with us when we move up to the higher octave of consciousness?
Yeah, great question, because traditionally, as you probably know, Emilio, astrology's been quite fated. What are the planets doing to me? It's been quite fated and predestined. And
the horoscopes.
Yeah. God, I've never in my entire career ever talked about sun signs, Smack me if I do. But I'm really trying to enable people to see it as this is our unique sheet of music. This is our modeling clay. And it's pure potentiality. If you look at the work of the theoretical physicist David Bohm, that very much links with the way I view astrology, that in the universe we have pure potentiality in the form of crystalline plasma. And that then steps down to a level of probability determined by your astrological archetypes in your own birth chart. And we then, as individuals, weave that tapestry of our lives, our reality, around that astrological probability for ourselves. Mm. And so really, astrology, your birth chart as a flat piece of paper, A4 piece of paper, is actually pure potential for you to live. It's the music that's not yet played. It's the modeling clay that's not yet formed. So to me, it is a map of your individual consciousness. And the more we can start to see astrology as potential consciousness moving forwards and a language of love, then we're on a roll to reconnecting with our galactic family. Because we know, it's kind of blowing circuits a little bit, we know that the universe is full of water vapor, actually. I mean, stars are just exploding into water all the time, which comes to Earth. Some of the water on Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And that water from very far galaxies is coming in as rain. We drink it, we ingest it, it becomes us, we pass it out and it moves on and through many human beings and then back to the galaxy. So we are in a constant flow of what Veda Austin is now referring to, and I'm really with her on this, as God consciousness.
Yes.
And it is the water that is also affecting and evolving our DNA. The information from the water is helping to evolve our DNA and remember, reenact, revigorate those strands that have been dormant for so long, to raise our consciousness, to reconnect us to our galactic families. So all of this, it's all of a piece, because of course we are living just in one consciousness. The whole thing is one consciousness. Everything is connected. So in understanding astrology as the potentiality, the pure potentiality of consciousness, and a language of love, and the more we can imprint water with love, we are not only upgrading our own physical vessel, we are broadcasting that out to the world and to the entire galaxy. We infect everybody and everything and the crystalline plasma all around us with high frequency love.
And what is astrology saying about how our physicality, our physical bodies are shifting? Another friend, Richard Rudd, he talks about, the DNA. We are unlocking more potentiality within our DNA as well. I heard you also had a dream once that you were in a light body. Maybe it was a premonitious sort of dream in a future lifetime or a parallel reality. But what is astrology saying about how our bodies are transforming as well, with all the currents of energy, the solar flares going into the planet right now? What's changing in our body?
Yeah. Huge questions. Well, firstly, I'd take Saturn in Pisces, because Saturn is our bone structure, if you like, our density. It's linked to lead, the metal lead, gravity, weightiness. In Pisces, it's being dissolved. So that's a very clear astrological signature that our density is dissolving. Other aspects of going almost beyond astrology is, you're probably well aware that because we are moving through a particular area of space called the galactic current sheet, and through the photon belt with this very high frequency light coming in, that is upgrading every cell in our body as well. And it comes down to what's our level of consciousness in terms of how much of that light we can embody. We are literally becoming more light beings as we move forwards, and that's happening pretty rapidly as well. And yes, the other thing that's very much affecting our physiology, literally every cell in our body, is the huge increase in solar flares, because we're peaking in solar cycle 25 early, as I'm sure you know. I think just a few days ago, we had something like 23 M-class flares in about 36 hours.
What?
In 2018, we didn't have a single M-class flare, not one. So that gives you the scale of difference. Now, on the one hand, the solar flares are also creating great turbulence in the energetic field. You know, it's upgrading Gaia, but that's happening so rapidly that, as I understand it, the iron and nickel core of the Earth is expanding and causing more seismic activity. The ionosphere around our Earth is also much more unstable than it's been, partly because of the solar flares, partly because of Gaia's own upgrade. And that unstable ionosphere is being caused by natural things like moving through the photon belt, but also unnatural EMFs, satellites, that kind of thing. Nevertheless, all of those things are ingredients for our evolution, because we as humanity are having to travel really fast with no dress rehearsal we are going to have to upgrade our frequency really rapidly in order to assimilate these high frequencies and go beyond them to thrive. So the more we can, if a medieval person turned up now, they would be poleaxed by the EMFs and the frequency we have on Earth, right? They would just fall over. But we as humanity have been able to upgrade so in our physicality so rapidly, we're able to go beyond anything which may be harmful. I truly believe this, and thrive. So the more we can get to the light body through staying in love, staying in peace, doing our meditative work, staying in stillness, not going interfere with big scary things, the more we will just ride these waves towards the light body. And that very clear dream I had that I will never forget, it was so crystal clear and pin sharp. And for those who didn't hear it, it was literally, 20, 30 seconds long at the end of the night. And I walked into a room that was empty, apart from being filled with kind of sparkly pink and peach light. And the only thing in the room was a mirror. And I walked up to the mirror and looked in the mirror, and I was just pure light. I was just light body, and my eyes were just extraordinary. And then I started to just levitate, just lift off, at which point the alarm went off, which was really annoying. But that wasn't just a promise for me, that was a promise for all of us going forward. And many people are starting to talk about this, experience this in their meditations, because this is happening quickly. We are shedding density really quickly.
Yeah, we're moving into a new density, the fourth density, or the fifth. Since you were around 7,
absolutely, and it's all happening. Yeah, it's all happening. The reconnections on the DNA, the reconnection to the galactic family, the rising frequency. It's all of a piece. It's all of a piece because we're one consciousness.
And since you were around 7, you've had an obsession with time, and even picked out a book that was called Time, I believe. And we mentioned briefly a moment ago about how what Robert is finding in these pyramids is that essentially the clock is going backwards. I was wondering if we could dive into that topic a little bit deeper, in terms of what does that actually mean on an astrological perspective, that time is moving backwards. I just remember being in the King's Chamber, and then Matthias De Stefano, he was channeling, and he was just going tick tock, tick tock the whole time. And I asked him, he's like, time is changing. So I was wondering if you had any insights or perspectives on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I remember many years ago as a student, with a brilliant astrological tutor. And of course, we were so used to looking forwards with the transits and progressions and solar arcs, etc. And he did a whole workshop on, okay, let's take your birth chart and let's work time backwards now. And we were blown away that all of the same experiences worked equally well if we took time backwards as opposed to forwards. And it was kind of, how do we get our heads around that, because we're so programmed into clock time. Yes, certainly the shifts of the ages, as I say, go backwards. We're moving from Pisces into Aquarius for another 2,000 or so years, and then we'll move back into Capricorn. So that time goes backwards. But I think what it's also saying is we are remembering civilizations from the past, and I'm thinking here of Atlantis and also Lemuria in particular, that were beautiful civilizations, exquisite, where they lived in this sense of Lemuria in particular. They lived as light bodies. They were connected by a silver cord to the earth, but they spent a lot of time in their light body, and they were completely immersed in this sense of oneness with the universe, with every other living thing. So they had incredible telepathic ability, incredible healing ability, and that knowledge has never been lost. That knowledge is in the field. And so in going backwards in time in one way, we are picking up, we are remembering some of those incredible abilities in ancient times like Lemuria and bringing them back into our current time and our future going forward. So there's this cyclical remembrance. And if you look at the archetypes for the dwarf planets, many of them have this very Lemurian, have this ancient shamanic connection to the earth, this instinctive connection to nature. Take a dwarf planet like Homer, who could summon wild food from the land, even if the land had been laid waste, with her magic stick, the Macaulay, and her shamanic abilities. But they also have a kind of leading edge understanding of how we manifest, how we create our reality with kind of quantum mechanics. And so they remind us of the ancient that was so beautiful, and that knowledge and those skills have never been lost, and they're coming back into our remembrance. But we are also moving forwards into the next cycle of evolution, through the expansion of our consciousness, even beyond those times. Okay, let's take this forward another giant step, because we're going to be living in this revolution of love, this physics of love going forwards. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, Emilio, but that's kind of how I see where we're going.
Beautiful. And just to give people the context as well, and also for my own understanding, why have we stated that time, or the clock, essentially is going backwards? Does that have any astrological connotations to it?
I think just the processional cycle, that we always move backwards with the ages. We move forwards with the zodiac signs and with our clocks and our birthdays, etc. But these ages around about 2,150, 2,160 years always move in reverse order. And that's why I think, there's a sense of nothing is ever lost. Nothing is ever lost. All of knowledge is captured within the cosmos, and we can weave our future reality by revisiting that in a much more conscious way going forwards.
And not to have people maybe go into that lens of fear when you say punish. When we're looking at it in our perspective, how do we see that when we're out of integrity? How does the universe self-correct in its divine law so that we start acting more in integrity and have that morality going forward?
Yeah, really nice question, Emilio, because I think in 3D, our 3D land, there's always a sense of we were right and you were wrong. There's a sense of polarity that comes in there. We're going to move way beyond that. So that for any individuals concerned who recognize that they have stepped out of integrity, they are going to move through that process themselves without any external forces coming into play to correct that. If I'm making myself clear, they will self-correct their own karma. And I think that's very much the message of Vada. You self-correct your own karma by seeing the error of your ways and moving forwards into the light and surrendering what may not have served you well. Because we're moving into a time where it's much more about service to others than service to self.
And from that's also in the Law of One. If you read that material, the Raw Contact.
Yep, long time ago. Yeah.
So yeah, we just had Aaron Apke on the show. He's like a modern teacher of the Law of One, and we got into that path of service or path to self, and it's the same. It's the positive polarity and then the negative polarity. You mentioned the term divine law. I would love to get into, from your understanding, what are the main laws that this universe abides by?
I think it is very much being in harmony with everything in the galaxy, being in right relationship, causing no harm, causing no loss, causing no crime, but being in constant harmony and balance. And again, the Lemurians excelled at this, that you would never hurt another sentient being, because that would be hurting yourself ultimately, because everything's connected, and doing everything for the benefit of nature, the benefit of the earth, the benefit of the animals, the trees, the plants, the snails, the slugs, everything, and respecting and loving every piece of sentient life. And this is almost kind of pantheism, that divine spirit is with every, rocks, crystals, that divine spirit is in everything. And that to me is divine law. That's how divine law thrives in the world. And again, we are going back to that, which is beautiful. So there's no need for laws that are written out in courts of justice and all these great legal tomes.
The commandments.
Yeah. I mean, that's all, really old stuff. We are going to self-correct. We are going to self-govern through our own healing of anything which hurts another living being will hurt us.
Yeah. And in simplified terms, that really is just the law of one. We are all one. Yeah. And in the Raw Contact, the second most important universal law is that of free will. So when we're speaking it from astrological terms, a lot of people might say like, oh, like this is my chart, so my life is gonna turn out this way. You've mentioned the term of pure potentiality. Where does free will really come in when you're studying someone's birth chart and looking at it from their also soul purpose, where they're headed as well?
Yeah, really good. Because again, as I said, the old astrology was very fated. This will happen to you. You must not get on that plane, otherwise, it's a very accident-prone time, which is terrible, really, because you're limiting that person's life by your own judgments and your own consciousness. But it's way beyond that, because, as I say, if we view each chart, and each chart is unique, it will never be lived in history again, which says we're all special. I mean, isn't that an amazing thought? Every chart is completely unique. But if we take it that is your unique sheet of music, which I think is quite a helpful analogy, you have complete free will, I deeply believe, in how you play that. You can butcher it on a tin box with a spoon, or you can make it absolutely magnificent, the London Philharmonic, whatever, because through my time of studying many thousands of charts, I've very often, in doing that, seen two people who actually have a chart that's quite close to each other in time and geography. And one might have pulled back a little and had a smaller life, and this is not my judgment, that's their judgment. I remember a particular couple of people that came to see me quite close in time as well. And they'd had parallel lives in many ways. They had great gifts with music. They got married at the same time. They had children at the same time. But one had worked at a local comprehensive school teaching music, and the other was actually doing brilliantly in an international philharmonic orchestra. And so it's not my judgment that that was a small life and a big life. It's down to that own person's judgment of how fully have I lived my life? How fully have I blossomed into my dharma, that which I was meant to become? Because in each chart, there will be the potential to be a sunflower, a rose, a chrysanthemum. It's like if you think of an oak tree, all of that information is held in the acorn. Everything is held in the acorn. It needs light and it needs water, but it doesn't need additional information because it's all encapsulated. It's a time capsule almost in that acorn, and that's what the birth chart is like. But it gives you the potential of your gifts, that you are going to be more athletic or more mathematical or more artistic or whatever, rose, a chrysanthemum, whatever. And it's very helpful to know that from a young age, because then the parent can actually nurture their children in different ways, because they all have different potentialities. And then it's up to you to live it absolutely as fully as you can, to really step into that dharma, that which you are meant to become.
Yeah. And after more than 45 years of studying astrology, what would you say that you found through studying this practice or this ancient language that are your gifts in this lifetime?
Oh, wow. I mean, I could talk for a long time about that yet. Because for me, I don't know what my life would have been without astrology, actually, Emilio. I don't know what my life would have been. It would have been, I think, much smaller, to be honest. It's really helped me to step into my dharma, and I think I've still got a long way to go.
Yes.
So it operates on many levels, because on one level it's a very practical framework for life. If you're having Jupiter transits, you can play your luck a little more. You can explore. If you're having Uranus transits, you're encouraged to be the maverick, the one who breaks the rules, the one who goes beyond the boundaries. If you're having Saturn transit, it has a very different purpose and meaning, that you have to keep your head down, you have to work very hard, you have to be very diligent, can't bunk off work early, and then you get your reward at the end. So each planetary transit has a very different meaning, purpose, and archetype. And it's almost like just watching a weather forecast. If you know there's a huge rainstorm coming, that's really helpful information, because you don't go out without your umbrella and your raincoat. It's helpful information. It doesn't rule your life, but it's really helpful to know. So at a very practical level, astrology helps us in a day-to-day sense. At another level, it absolutely helps us to understand our soul's purpose in this lifetime. And this is really linked to the nodal axis. And my last book was about the nodal axis, because this is much bigger in Vedic astrology. It dominates the whole birth chart, much less so in Western astrology. But essentially, this is linked to the orbit of the moon. But the north node in your birth chart shows you your compass needle, where you are meant to be headed in terms of developing gifts and skills in this particular lifetime, as defined by the sign and the house area. For me, mine is in Aquarius, astrology, doing something weird in the third house of communication. So I write and speak and, weird stuff. So it gives great clarity, because when I saw that, the chart all of a sudden was no longer circular. It became like a teardrop shape almost, that the north node was your compass needle, and everything else in the birth chart was the cavalry. Was the cavalry to back up your soul's path of growth in this lifetime. And The south node is where we have already developed our gifts, and we can easily fall back because they're familiar and safe and known. But if we do that, we'll never crack virgin territory. The purpose is to move forwards into things which may not feel comfortable, where you've got to be a bit of a pioneer in something new, but that's where your soul will grow. So for me, I mean, I've got a long way to go with this. I've got lifetimes to go with this in terms of stretching my consciousness to a different point. So as I say, where I'm now headed is really trying to understand this consciousness revolution, this revolution of love, this revolution of understanding the physics of creation, to start doing some kind of deep space astrology, galactic astrology. And I've got L plates on with that. We are just at the beginnings of that, of what is our galactic family. Is it Palladian? Is it Arcturian? Is it Andromedan? And how does that work in terms of our Dharma and our soul's purpose this time around? We're stepping way beyond the earth right now.
And I know there was a clairvoyant who emailed you or wrote to you saying that she started seeing a lot of blue light around your field, and how these blue beings that can also even be seen in Joe Dispenza workshops, working on people. Have you had any direct experience with your galactic family in this life?
I get it in my dreams and in my writing. And the Arcturians, for sure, I think are very close. I actually feel that I have a particularly what's called a healing pod in this room here, and sensitive people who step in say, this is Arcturian energy. And I think the way I operate is quite Arcturian. It's got to have a sort of science aspect to it, but also the spiritual aspect. And more in my dreams, I'm seeing these very tall beings, these blue beings, who I think also linked to Sirius as well, which are spiritual sun. But they are coming forth with clearer messages of where I've got to head to. And so many people have talked about these blue orbs around me in my videos. And, I'm not aware of them in my videos. I just got to stay on track with the dates, the degrees, and the minutes. But, but I'm obviously in the zone because, I always say before every video, come on down, guys. And
they're feeding you the information too.
Yeah. Because it's that bit at the end where I kind of go off-piste from the data. And that often, particularly if people aren't familiar with astrology, that's the most useful bit, because I'm talking more generally about consciousness or whatever. And I think that's where the blue beings and the Arcturians in particular are coming in. And that's a stronger and stronger feeling for me as I move forwards. They've got a lot to teach me. I'm just at the very first steps of that.
Yeah, because you've even sprinkled a lot of information in this podcast about Lemurians, that civilization. I'm really curious, from where is that knowledge about those ancient civilizations coming through for you? Are they direct insights, downloads that are coming through? Have you studied ancient civilizations? Where does that knowledge come in for you?
I think for me it comes through nature. And Lemurians were very connected to the light. They were very connected to mountaintops because they used to build, you may know, Emilio, they used to build their healing temples out of crystals, always on the top of mountains, because that's where the energy vortex was, and they knew that. And these healing temples were literally just crystals with, bits of sort of wooden struts and canvas over them, but the healing power was drawn from the mountain, a little bit like the pyramids, being an energy source as well, in the same shape as it were, the top of the mountain. And so when I'm in nature and I can see this different quality of light emerging, this very fine, sparkly diamond photonic light, and I see the blend of everything, how as I'm walking through the wood and with the wild ponies and donkeys and the dragonflies, I feel that everything is morphing. Everything is morphing into that crystalline light. Everything is morphing into one, and everything is pulsating love. That's how I feel it, just pure pulsating love. So I think for sure I have some connection back to Lemuria, because that's kind of one of my go-to places in terms of a spiritual connection. And day by day, even if it's absolutely chucking it down in England, which it so often is, I can still connect to that kind of finesse of bright white sparkly light. And it brings in a feeling of love and just everything having a life force as I walk through the wood, everything vibrant, life force, humming, electric, just full of being that is constantly wanting to evolve to a higher state of being.
You mentioned the pyramids. Do you believe they were also healing temples?
100%. 100%. I haven't been myself. My good friend Heather Ensworth, I think, would love to take me there. But yes, absolutely. Because as I understand it, in the main pyramids, they didn't ever find a body. Those are in different pyramids. So what was the purpose of these? And I know certainly toning. I was listening to a video just yesterday by John Stuart Reid, who was allowed to go into, I think, the King's Chamber. And he put some sand on the sarcophagus and toned, and he had someone with him who was very powerful at toning. And not only was he seeing patterns as you'd normally get with cymatics in sand, he was seeing patterns of hieroglyphics, which is just astounding, isn't it? So for sure, I think they were used for healing, using toning, using sound. And you may know also there's a very good TED talk, quite an old TED talk now, with a professor from a London music school called Anthony Holland. And he discovered that the 11th harmonic shatters cancer cells. Cells. So, think how much money that would save in medical services. But I think
there would be no industry.
no drugs, no industry. So we are on the brink, because if you think of the glyph of Aquarius, it's two jaggedy lines of energy and frequency. We are going to learn so much about the healing power of light and sound as we move forward. And for sure, I believe that they were used as healing chambers. Yeah, I have absolutely no doubt about that. And I think Robert believes that too, from what I understand from his podcast.
Yeah. And we are entering, we're just about a month in 2024, what you've been calling a historic year, revolutionary year, a pivot point, leaps of consciousness. Giving an overview, of course, Pluto entering Aquarius, which you've briefly mentioned. These are around, 200 plus year cycles. What are we seeing now going forward? You mentioned there's some huge changes coming in the next about 2-3 years.
Yeah, so much here. Well, firstly, I just did a video a week or so ago that kind of went crazy, called Revolution 2.0, because I was expecting, as Pluto entered Aquarius, we would be in an energy that was much more revolutionary, because Capricorn has been very much a vertical structure of top-down control. And historically, whether that was the church or autocratic monarchy or whatever, in our times we might say that was governments or corporations or institutions that have very much been elitist and held power over us. So that is kind of crumbling. Those old structures are crumbling. So I knew that Pluto moving into Aquarius would be a big deal in a revolutionary sense, because that starts to shift the power back to the grassroots, to the people. And very often to younger people, actually. Aquarius is very linked to younger people in particular. And so what you're seeing in Europe right now, and you are in Europe, Emilio, so you know better than I do what is happening with the farmers in
Feeling
Europe.
all of it.
The farmers in Europe, this is like an exact replay of 1789. When the peasants stormed the Bastille, took down the monarchy, monarch was executed, France became a republic. And they are not going to give in, because they've reached a pivot point of there is too much inequality. The power has to shift back. And if we look at 1789 and what happened in France, that was the beginning. It took some years, but that was the beginning of the formation of the first middle class ever, I think. Small enterprises started to begin, small businesses, small farms. The tax rules changed to take away benefits from the aristocracy and benefit the ordinary people. And within a month of that storming of the Bastille in August 1789, the Assemblée Nationale published something called the Declaration of the Rights of Man, only men at that point, not women, never mind. And that became the foundational document for democracy across Europe. So this was a massive socio-economic and political shift, which began in 1789. So I knew something big was going to happen. So not only that revolution in Europe, but if we look at what's happening to America right now, the charts that I believe most astrologers use is the 4th of July, 1776, Declaration of Independence. And that, of course, came from the wonderful beings leaving the onerous taxation and control of King George in England and saying, no, we're going to create a land of liberty, freedom, equality, and off we went to the new land. And there were 13 British colonies originally that became divorced from the old England and set up this new world. So this is now, and if you look at what's happening in America, and yes, there are many layers and smoke and mirrors to this, of course they are, because revolution is never tidy. But nevertheless, it is people standing up and saying, no, we are going to take the power back, because it's a time of great sovereignty. Remembering our sovereignty, remember that we have to live from the inside out, not the outside in. Remember that we are powerful, co-creating beings. And this is the urge. This is the urge that's happening. Now, that's going to be super strong all this year. And so, Pluto's going to be in Aquarius till 2044. But it's always, particularly when it enters a sign, we feel this shift in energy that becomes very strong. Now, that's going to be heightened in April, because Jupiter conjuncts Uranus, which is the ruler of Aquarius. Jupiter always expands that energy. So we're going to see even more revolutionary energy around this time. It's not going to go away, and it is going to accelerate the collapse of the old order. A lot of truth, a lot of revelation, a lot of shock, a lot of surprise, a lot of awakening. It's all going to feed into, okay, how do we birth a much more loving, joyful, abundant, and compassionate world than we currently have? How do we do that?
And we've been living in that energy of Capricorn, which is very much the top-down structure, hierarchical approach. And you're saying that Aquarius energy is much more decentralized.
100%.
What does that look like?
It's absolutely. Well, it's going to be grassroots up, communities, collaborations, people coming together. Many groups are starting up all over the world and have been over the last couple of years, because COVID really had a boomerang effect, that because we were shut down, locked down our homes in various places, there's a boomerang effect that we want to connect to other human beings. Different ages, different backgrounds, different work, it doesn't matter. We just want to connect with other human beings, to hug, to laugh, and to say, boy, we're not going to do that again. How do we create a better world? So there was one chap in Australia who set up the Stand in the Park idea. I don't know if you've heard about these, and these are happening all over the world, that you gather for free on a Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, people come together and they say, okay, what do we do? So I'm in a big group of well over 100 people. We've got a carpenter, we've got a builder, we've got an astrologer, we've got many healers, therapists. We are all doing something positive to start to create a new world. Many groups are buying land, they're growing food, they're using new healing technologies, so you don't even have to go and see your regular doctor. There are ways by using, there are all kinds of new devices that we're using, but also going back to homeopathy, plant medicine, all that kind of thing, because we are saying nature has everything that we need to heal ourselves. And so we are taking the power back in that way out of the system that we have lived in, and that is happening all over the world at speed. These groups are really accelerating in velocity and momentum, and that's going to happen a lot more this year. And so that's how the new Earth is going to be born. And it's happening right now. I'm in it. I'm in a group that's doing that.
Yeah. And maybe a lot of people tuning into this conversation might consider themselves maybe outsiders if they're getting into these esoteric topics, and then they're around in their communities and struggling to find who to talk to. this about, but you said that this is a moment where the outsiders become the leaders.
Yeah, I love that.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I love that, because it's people who would never want to be a leader, because they don't want to be the kind of old style top down leader. I am telling you what to do. I'm giving you rules and regulations. Again, we're all done with that. So this is people, I would say, absolutely, Robert Edward Grant is one of those. People who are visionaries, who are ideas, people who are progressives. I think Nassim Haramein is another one of those who, is shattering paradigms with his view of physics. So people who would never ever say, I'm a leader in this new world, but they are, because what they do is attract people around them who say, I love your work, I love what you're doing, I love your vision. And they are all very heart-centered people. They're heart-centered people who themselves, perhaps, I know Nassim Haramein, he never went to school. He left school very early because he was severely dyslexic. He didn't fit in.
Yeah.
And nature was his teacher. With all of his physics, nature was his teacher. So these are people who may have felt on the periphery. They didn't fit in. They didn't work with the system. As an astrologer, I've been severely ridiculed over the years, but actually I don't care, because this is my mission. This is my dharma. So it's people who have not operated within mainstream society who are going to attract people, magnetize people around them to start to create something very different. And again, it's heart-centered and it's birthed from love.
And looking ahead to April, you mentioned it briefly, there's going to be a total solar eclipse. Giving people a context of why is that solar eclipse going to give us a new beginning, as you've mentioned?
Well, in a way, every total solar eclipse is a new beginning, because it's like a super big new moon. So it's in that sense. So if it falls on something very specific in your chart, you can have a sense of jumping forwards in your soul's path of growth. If it falls on your sun or your midheaven, you suddenly get an opportunity in your work, perhaps, or somebody promotes your work, or a project opens up. There's a wild card aspect to it. There's a jumping forwards aspect. It's like a big new beginning for many, many people. But it's going to be particularly strong in the US, because the eclipse path falls across the US. The previous, we had August 2017, total solar eclipse fell northwest to southeast across America. October 14th last year, total solar eclipse fell northwest to southeast. This one coming up on the 8th of April is falling northeast to southwest. So the crossing point is Texas. So I knew that something was going to happen in Texas. But this is within the context of the US, of its total Pluto return. Transiting Pluto in the heavens in its orbit, coming back for the very first time since the US was born in 1776. So you put those two things together and you think, wow, this is going to be a very big time of rebirth for the US. Who and what is the US? And that may involve certainly a change in political structure, economic structure, but I think it could even involve a change in geography. Who and what makes up the US going forwards? Some states may break away. So it's going to be very big in that way. And whatever happens in the US, obviously economically, will ripple across the rest of the world, but also politically. Whatever truth comes to light will ripple across the rest of the world. So this is going to be huge. And because it's also conjunct Chiron, this is going to be a big healing in victim consciousness. So many of us have been encouraged to live in victim consciousness, and Chiron in Aries, it's wounded in the I amness, if you like. People who have natally Chiron Aries, they have a sense in their early years of, do I even have a right to exist? They're wounded in the I amness. But the purpose of it is to step into leadership and sovereignty with that. So that total solar eclipse being super tightly conjunct Chiron, I think, is going to be a big part of the awakening to heal an awful lot of the victim consciousness of, hey, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm a sovereign, powerful co-creator, and I'm going to step into that energy right now. And that's going to be a whole energy shift at that time.
Yeah.
And that's backed up by the Jupiter Uranus conjunction as well, following a couple of weeks later.
I'm fascinated by your brain right now because I can only imagine. I mean, you've said before that astrology, when it comes to predictions, it's always symbolical, not absolute, or I forget the word you use, but it's symbolical. And I can only imagine the level of neural connections that have to go into your brain when you're reading, and this is 45 years of experience of learning the energies, learning the symbologies, the myths of each planet, each zodiac. So I'm just fascinated with your brain. I just wanted to mention that.
That's very generous of you, Emilio. It's very generous. There's a lot going on here. I feel often quite buzzed up when I'm doing my videos or I'm writing. I feel quite jazzed up, but I think that's energy. I can't take credit for it. I think it's coming through me rather than from me. But people say I'm channeling. I don't know if I'm channeling, but certainly information is coming in at speed at many levels.
Yes.
That's my feeling.
Yeah. And as an astrologist, you're always looking out to foresee any events that happen. Has there been an event in, the last couple of years where you've said, I had no idea this was coming?
No, not. I never know the event. I never know the actual execution and the specifics, but what all astrologers can see is the energy. In any chart, they can see the area of life. If it's an individual chart, is it going to be career, health, money, whatever, but also the timing. And so with that very big Saturn-Pluto conjunction it was on the 12th of January 2020, I just kept seeing jackboots on the tarmac. Contraction, control. Because if you go back historically, if you looked at when that was last in Capricorn, I think the last time was 1517, 1518, there's a theme of the abuse of power, the abuse of top-down power. So I knew there was going to be some major, major event of contraction and control, but I didn't know how it was going to play out. But it's interesting, we're moving out of all of that contraction now into expansion of consciousness. And the other, you're asking about these big shifts going forward. There's so many indications of new beginning. There's Pluto moving into Aquarius, but also over the next 3 years, the outer traditional planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, as well as Pluto, are all changing signs. They're moving from water and earth, heavy and slow, into air and fire.
And that's rare, right? That doesn't happen.
Rare. You've got to go back about 300 years to when that happened before, but that doesn't even include the dwarf planets, because many of the dwarf planets are shifting sign as well now that we know that we didn't know 300 years ago. So if you add in the dwarf planets, which are shifting sign, like Sedna right now, end of Taurus into Gemini, I can't go back fast, and I don't know if there'll ever be a time which is such a major shift, and it's the end of the precessional cycle from end of Pisces moving into Aquarius. So you've got so many at every level. You've got so many endings, beginnings. There's no way we're going back to the old. I mean, there's absolutely no way. There's so much energy and life force to propel us forwards, and that's going to accelerate this year. It's not going to be dull. It's going to be a mess at the 3D level, because we're smashing out the old kitchen cupboards to make space for the new. 3D level, rubble, dust, builder's yard, a mess. Higher level, exhilarating, expansive, loving, can't ride it fast enough.
And you probably also have to be very connected to what's going on in the world in terms of the news. And as we know, in the spiritual community, that sometimes the news can get distorted, giving a message of fear. So how do you stay grounded in learning about what's going on in the world? Because, you have to be informed about what's going on, all the events, without falling into the fear traps that sometimes people can get into when consuming information.
Yeah. I talk about this a lot, as you know, Emilio. Well, firstly, get rid of your television. I now have a beautiful large plant here instead of a television. That's the first piece of advice I'd give. But really recognize the endless pattern of the next really big, scary thing. Other really big, scary thing. if you've ever been in an abusive relationship, you get to the point of saying, do you know what, I'm just done with really big, scary things. So for me, I am close to nature. Yes, I'm very aware of what's going on in the world, but I see it from a point of divine neutrality. I see it from my eagle's perch. I observe it, and I think, well, is that true? Is that not? It might be. But actually, there's so many layers to smoke and mirrors. There's so much deception, misinformation. I'm just going to observe it and see if it's linked to the astrology which is unfolding. And I will trust the astrology. And I will trust the evolutionary promise and the expansion of consciousness that I see in the astrology. So I will just observe and say, yep, I'm sort of clocked into what's happening, but I'm actually seeing it at a different level. Because if you look at the so-called, and they are revolutions that are happening in Europe and the US right now, I'm thinking that is bullseye. That is smack on what I expected to see astrologically. So if you're on the ground, it might be uncomfortable, going to be food shortages and very difficult things at a 3D level, but actually it's a necessary breakdown of the old world to break through to something much more magnificent. So we've got to trust. For me, I'm so lucky because I have the language of astrology. I can trust this. After all these years, I trust the astrology. I trust the evolution. I trust this tsunami of love that I feel gets stronger and stronger in the people I connect to and in my days. And I make that my purpose to live through love, to live through my heart, to live through love, to beam out love to the world, particularly if I have any difficult neighbors or anything. I will bless them and beam out love. And that works wonders to soften any difficult dynamics. But I am going to do everything I can in my lifetime here to beam out love to the world to make a difference. Because astrology, yes or no, that is the thing that will really make the difference. But it also gives you objectivity. The astrology gives me the perspective, gives the objectivity that I can see the same cycles repeating through time and vortexing upwards. But we're moving into a stage where it's all about love. So I can add in that huge dollop of love on top of it. So I don't know if that's answered your question, Emilio.
Yeah, I always love to repeat this quote that I heard from Robert, and we've been talking so much about him, so just pertain to the conversation, that he says, enlightenment is when the expression of love supersedes the seeking for truth.
Yeah, beautiful. And yeah, because I think we go through stages, don't we? We go through a stage of disillusionment, and we go through a stage of seeking for truth on our journey, and I think many of us have done that. And then we kind of go beyond that and think, that doesn't really matter either, because I'm creating my truth. I'm creating my reality from the inside out. I wake up and I say, I will dominate my day with love. I will dominate my day with joy. So whatever's happening in the outside world, I am creating my tomorrow, and I'm helping the collective to create their tomorrows, because tomorrow's invisible. Tomorrow hasn't happened yet. We're helping it manifest. It's completely invisible. So you and I, Emilio, are changing the collective in this conversation, because if we can send out love in this interchange between us, that will change tomorrow's future for the collective. We're playing our own little part in that. So, and I think also I've recommended something terribly simple to people, stick Post-it notes all around your house. What's your frequency? Are you dipping into fear? Because that's not going to get you or the collective anyway. You're going to create more fear tomorrow. You're going to get more of what you think about all day long. So stop it. Stop it. Check in like a thought policeman. Just stop it. And turn your feelings to love. Do you have a pet you love, a child you love, a friend you love, a tree you love? Flick it into love in the simplest way you can. Do you love the birdsong? But get into love by being aware when you dip in your frequency and go into fear.
And Pam, you have inspired a flood of new astrologers that have learned about you, learned from you. And there's also going to be a huge wave of next generation astrologers. And we've even like scratched the surface in this conversation about what's coming new to astrology, the dwarf planets, so much is changing. So where would you begin for people that are dipping their toes into astrology? They're young, or they're just getting into the field. Where would you guide them? In astrology?
Because the young people now coming in are so gifted. They're going to get just the download without having to do the slog of the study like I did. It's a whole new era of you just get the download. So they won't have to go through all those decades of textbooks and logarithms and working out charts by hand. They won't have to do that. So I think I would simply say to start, there are quite a few astrologers on YouTube. See who draws you energetically, just in energy. And then you can, I've got some training videos on my website that go from beginners to more advanced. Dip into those. They're all very inexpensive. I want them to be accessible to people. And then just see, that will start you on your astrological journey as you start to understand your own birth chart. And if you set a clear intention that the perfect teacher will come to you in this moment to help you on your astrological journey, whether that's a physical human being or whether that's an Arcturian. Set that clear intention that perfect being will come to you to instruct you, and it will manifest for you. But the young people are going to be picking it up by osmosis in a different way.
Yeah. And it all starts with intention, as that's how we started this episode. And to end it, we like to end with a segment called the Final Trio, which are briefly rapid fire questions that you can answer in any way that you want. But before that, where can people find you, Pam, and connect with you and learn deeper with you?
Yeah. Website is pamgregory.com. YouTube, which is super busy, is Pam Gregory Astrology, not astrologer. That's the scammer. Pam Gregory Astrology, and
that's the scammer. Report him right now, or her.
Worry,
they.
Anyway, we just sort of move on from that. But yes, I put out a fair few videos, 5-6 a month. Some just astrological updates, some interviews. I'm being interviewed, or I'm interviewing someone else, and there's very rich information there. A lot of rich material there that people can learn from. Yeah, so that's a good start point.
Amazing. Beautiful. For the final trio, the first two questions are personalized to the guest, and the final one we ask at the end of every show. So the first one is, what does it mean to be a human?
Wow. It means loving the physicality of existence, because I think that's the reason we are ascending in physicality, to keep our physicality. And so rejoice in your senses, particularly when you're in nature. Rejoice in your senses, the bark on the trees, the smell of spring flowers, the sound of the birdsong. Develop that heightened awareness of the senses, and that only comes, I think, if we're just a spirit, we can't feel that. So really delight and rejoice in the senses that only come with our physicality as a human.
Well, I have no problem with that, because my moon is in Taurus.
Perfect place for your moon to be. Yeah, you've got heightened awareness anyway with all those senses.
I love the sensual pleasures, the food,
all of that. Yeah, of course, it's exalted. It's in a fabulous place.
The second one is, if we were on an airplane right now, we didn't know each other, and I saw you with a birth chart doing your thing, and I said, "You don't really believe in astrology, do you?" What would you say to them?
I do. But I also say you don't have to believe in it. Because you don't say, do you believe in French? Do you believe in German? Do you believe in Spanish? It's a language. It's a language. It's not a belief system. It's not a religion. It's a language which gives us a different paradigm, a different cut through into reality that I don't think any other modality does in the same way. I mean, there's some fabulous modalities out there and they have their own cut-throughs, but astrology gives you a very specific and distinct one to make sense, both practically and spiritually, of whatever we are experiencing now, historically, going forwards. It gives you very clear cosmic language, and it's a sacred language. It's a profound language of geometry and meaning. And that's what I'd say, sitting next to you on the plane.
I love that. And I love how you refer to it as a sacred language. Have you ever tried to learn any other language other than English?
Yes, French, because I've had French lifetimes as well. So yes, I did pretty well on my it's drivel now because I haven't used it for a few years, but it was pretty good at one point. Yeah. And
how does it compare to be learning astrology versus French?
Yeah,
for
brilliant
example?
question. Brilliant. Astrology is much more complicated. It's like using French times, to the 9th cubed, as it were. It's way, because it's so multi-layered. You can get to the point with any foreign language where you say, yep, I've cracked it. Yes, I can speak fluently in that language. Yes, I know it now. It's finite, as it were. You never, ever, ever get to that point with astrology. It's so vast. It's so infinite. I mean, after all my years, I learn something new every single day. Every single day there's something new. And it's just going further and further out in the cosmos. It's never boring. It's never dull. So yes, from that point of view, it's sacred, infinite, and magnificent.
Yeah. What came to mind is that human language was created by the ego limited mind, and astrology was created by the infinite higher mind of God, of the universe.
Beautiful. So I like that a lot. Beautiful. Absolutely. And again, the pyramids may teach us much about that. I think, I don't know if you've seen Rob Edward Grant's podcast from this morning on the Next Level Soul podcast.
Yeah. It's not yet.
Yeah. Recommended. It's mind-blowing because I think from that and his investigations, we are going to just go in leaps and bounds. But what you've just said is just beautiful.
The last question, Pam, is called the time capsule question. And essentially it helps us look out into the future a bit, around 15, 20 years. I guess when we're in the lower tail of this transit in Pluto. But essentially I chose this time frame because that's when the next generation of leaders, the young people now, are going to be stepping more into leadership positions. And you were given the opportunity to leave behind a time capsule for these leaders where they will step into a room and they will see all these different time capsules from wisdom keepers, paradigm shifters, and inside those time capsules are going to be the tools, the knowledge, the wisdom that are going to help them lead into the new earth. And you could leave anything behind in this time capsule. It doesn't have to be physical. It could be an energetic transmission. It can be a book. It can be a teaching. It can be whatever your mind can conceive of. But what would you leave behind for these leaders inside a time capsule?
Wow. Beautiful question. Beautiful question. I think I would say always live with love, with humility, with integrity, with compassion, with joy, and always welcome in an expanded consciousness of love on your journey.
I love that. And on top of the time capsule, there's a golden plate where it would be your name and a question, a reflective, contemplative question that you could leave behind. So when they open it, they can have that sort of question in mind when they're going about to create and envision a future.
Right. It would be, is your Dharma acting in the highest good for all? Is your Dharma acting in the highest good for all?
I love
and you
that.
needn't put my name on it.
The universe. Pam, thank you so much. Infinite blessings. We really went deep, and that was our intention with this episode. Of course, I would always love to have you back on if that is something that you are up to. And thank you so much for your infinite service to humanity, for all the wisdom that you are holding and sharing as well. Because a lot of people, they go to their deathbed with the wisdom all in their head. And what you've done is share it and reached millions of people. So thank you so much for your service.
I've loved it, Emilio. You've gone into some very different areas and kind of stretched my brain a little bit, which I love. Actually, it was asked very different questions. So, and God bless you. You're starting this journey of service very young, and so you will be able to help so many people in their evolution. This is just the beginning of a long, amazing, wise journey of love for you too.
Well, I haven't stopped smiling this whole conversation. Aho, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's been a joy. I've loved it, Emilio. Thank you so much for asking me. I'm honored.